Welcome back to Communicology. Today I'd like to probe a little bit deeper into the idea of forming new friendships and getting to know another person. In a previous episode, we discussed the idea from a philosophical standpoint, and let's start moving that into the practical and what that looks like and how I could then get to know someone a little bit better. So in the previous episode, we talked about the idea of treating the other person, just viewing them in the first place as an other, and someone who has actual agency, someone who actually has value, someone who has some kind of level of importance, from a theological standpoint, having that image of God that they have and treating them as such. Because again, if you treat somebody like like a commodity, like a transactional piece, you're not going to get into a good friendship that way. So how do I start? Well, I start viewing them in this deeper way. And that opens the door. So from a practical standpoint, what does that look like moving forward? Because we could talk about the philosophical all day, but eventually you got to put your feet on the ground and start moving forward. So let's talk about some of those things that we could do. So the first thing, and it's usually the hardest part, is initiative. You have to want to do it. Now, deep down, you might say, I want to have more friends, or I want to meet new people, or I want to get to know that person. But, it's just like going back to junior high or high school when you had to suck up the courage to ask that special person out on a date. It's that first step is the hardest one because it just, we have that feeling of rejection. But in this situation, we're not asking someone out on a date, granted, you could use this for that as well, but it's the idea of just getting to know somebody. It's not like you walk up to saying, hey, can we be friends? Typically, that works well when you're 5, but not so much when you're 25 or 45. So it's one of those things we need to think of. What do I need to do? I have to want to make a friend and figure out, is this person someone I can be friends with? So again, when you have that initial standpoint of saying, this is a person who is worthy of talking to. This is a human being in front of me, and I'm going to treat them the way I want to be treated. Again, that's a great foundation, and then we start walking on that foundation. The idea of, I want to reach out and see what this person is like. So, again, sucking up the courage to do that and trying to figure it out. So, that first step, the initiative, and then you actually then have to open your mouth and start talking. So, again, we always look for the idea of common ground when it comes to trying to look at new friendships or keeping friendships moving or resolving crises and other kind of conflicts. It always comes back to the same thing, common ground. What do we have in common other than the fact, of course, we're human and that we need each other as humans do? What's our common ground? I know I have likes, I have dislikes. I have things that I love and things that I don't love, and things I would like to talk about and some things I just don't care much about. Now, you have to be careful here because do you know why you love what you love? Do you know why you don't love what you don't love? It could very well be that you don't love something because you just haven't found someone else who has a passion for it. So if I say, I like this thing, so I'm going to find someone who has the exact same likes that I do, well, you're starting to really narrow down your scope because you're looking at the idea of only this. If they don't fit in this box, I don't want to get to know them. That's unfair to the other person. It's also unfair to you because you might like other things. So I've had friends before that they are into something that I've never done. And instead of saying, ooh, I don't know that, I don't care, or that's not my thing, so therefore I'm not going to go for it, I was willing to try it. And some things, you try and you're like, this is incredible. How have I not known about this? And some things you try and go, no, actually, now I know I don't like that. And that happens. And there are some things that you don't like and you know why you don't like them and you don't like them for a certain reason. So, knowing yourself is very, very important to making that step and trying to find that common ground. So having the initiative and then trying to find common ground but being flexible on that common ground, because again, we tend to think too deeply as in, I want to find someone who matches up with me like perfectly. Like you look at some dating sites and they talk about people being a perfect match and they can find all these things that you like and try to find someone who's exactly like you. Well, there's not going to be any kind of fun. There's not going to be any kind of spark. There's not going to be any kind of growth because they're just like you. We find the most spark, the most growth when we find ways to expand. You know, the idea is that opposites attract when they talk about that way for dating. It's the same thing with friendships. Now, the reasons why opposites attract is not that you're drawn to someone who's totally opposite of you. It's that the idea is they have their set of likes. You have your set of likes. And you love the things that you love and they love the things that they love. Why do they love them? I mean, that's interesting. At least it should be. It should draw you. Again, the idea of opposites attracting. So this is something that I don't think about or maybe I don't care for, but they love it. Why? And that's got a power to it, and it just draws you into it. When I teach my students public speaking and they're trying to think, well, are they going to care about my topic? I mean, it's something personal to me. Are they going to care? It's like, if you love it, it's going to come out. And people will be drawn to your speech because if you love it, then maybe it's worth paying attention to. So they'll just get drawn to it. And so that's the same kind of thing when it comes to dating. It's the same kind of thing with any kind of friendships. So don't be so rigidly stuck on your need for my common ground being the exact, they have to match me exactly. You have to have that willingness to expand your common ground a little bit, to at least try. It's like when you're a little kid, like, and your parent says you have to clean your plate. It's like, I don't want to eat that thing in front of me. You have to at least take a bite. So just take that bite and try it. And if you don't like it, that's fair. But you might end up loving it. So I've had those experiences where I've tried things and loved it, tried things, didn't love it. But at least I could say I tried and was fair to not just that other person, but to myself. So it's good to expand your horizons, not to be so narrowly confined. So the other thing that has to come into play is you have to then take this, the next step once you start finding these common ground things, is to then prioritize this friendship. So we've started chatting. We find out we both like this thing. Well, let's talk about it more often. Let's make space available to make it happen more often. So, that bumping into them every now and then isn't going to become a friendship. We have to say, hey, let's get together. I want to grab coffee sometime. Or if we both like a certain sport, like, hey, do you want to go catch the game? Or there's a band playing or a musical or something that you just want to get together and do it. Just like, hey, you want to do this? Or maybe it's a sport that you both like to do. Like, hey, you want to go shoot hoops or something like that down at the park. I'll meet you there and I'll bring the ball, get some exercise, we'll chat. Again, you have to make this a priority. You have to say, I am going to carve time out of my schedule. I am going to make this person part of my, not necessarily routine, but part of my life, and that I'm going to do this. So, again, it's so often that we tend to put all the onus on the other person. How many times have you said, oh, I don't talk to so-and-so anymore. They never reach out to me. It's like, well, do you reach out to them? No. Well, you kind of have to do it both ways. Even if it feels one-sided. Like, well, I'm always the one that's reaching out. Well, there's two things at play. Either they're not very good at it, or maybe they're trying to send you a signal that they're kind of done. But it's one of those things that you still have to try. Because if you don't try, well, you can't complain when they don't try. So that prioritizing the friendship becomes an important part of this. You have to care to do this kind of a thing. And then you have to try to keep working at being consistent. Again, prioritizing doesn't mean once a month we'll get together for coffee. It means that we're going to get together a little bit more often. And nowadays it's so much simpler because with smartphones and things like that, texting somebody a joke or a meme is just so easy. It's a quick way to have this neat little touch point about something. So you have this interest, and I found a meme about it, and I just shoot a quick text to that person. That's an easy way to have some kind of touchstone that, 30, 20 years ago, it would have been hard because very rarely you call someone up and say, hey, so I was thinking about basketball and thinking about you. I mean, that's a little weird to do. So it's just so easy to shoot them a quick text of a joke, a meme, something, a news story that I saw about the thing that we have in common, whatever. And it's a great, easy way to do it. So prioritize that friendship. The next thing is we have to practice consistency. So super sporadic, occasional, this frenetic, we'll get together whenever or whatever thing doesn't work. We have to say like, hey, let's shoot hoops this Saturday. So we get together, and maybe while you're shooting hoops, and you say, you know what, this is kind of cool. I know I need the exercise. Do you want to get together too? And why don't we just start shooting hoops every Saturday? That like locks it in really easily to the point that you're doing it consistently. Now, that doesn't mean you're gonna have to do it every time, because you might have to cancel one Saturday or the other person does. But you have this thing that you can do, or maybe there's a club or a group or whatever in town. So you're into crafting, and there's a little crafting group that meets at a local civics club or a church or something like that meets every Tuesday. Well, then you get together then. And again, it's one of those things that's how that consistency works. Which, by the way, that's another great way to actually meet people in the first place. If you're always at home, getting to meet new people is very hard. But if you're out and about, that doesn't mean you need to jump in and do everything. But if you enjoy, say, crafting, like I mentioned, and you go to, and you're at a club and you're doing crafting you're there every week, well, look at the people around you. They also like crafting. That's why you're there. So you already know you have common ground. So that's a quick, easy start. So then you move from there to grabbing coffee. So maybe before a crafting group, you grab coffee and chat. Or maybe after crafting group, you get together and have coffee. Or maybe there's crafting group, and then every Saturday morning, you get together and have coffee. Again, those are kind of things that you just can look for. But anyway, consistency is the important thing. So it can't be this sporadic whenever it just pops up. Try to figure out, how can we meet more often? How can we get together more often? The next thing that comes into play too, is trying to create some kind of area, where they feel comfortable talking with you. So this personal comfort level zone that we all have has to eventually be breached. So we've been getting together, we've been shooting hoops or doing crafting or whatever the thing is that we do, and we've been doing it for a while. Eventually we get to a point where, well, there's more than just this thing. There's our personal lives that we, and eventually start getting to a point where maybe I'm ready to open up and tell you a few things. Not like the deepest, darkest personal secrets of your soul or the skeletons in your closet, but at least some basic things like where you're from, where's your family, all that kind of stuff, where you went to college, and all these other things that some of it's superficial, some of it's a little bit deeper, but the idea of even opening is kind of scary at times. But you need to create that space for them to where they feel welcome to say those kind of things. Because if they say something and you start mocking it, well, they're not going to want to tell you anymore. And things are going to fizzle pretty fast, because if you're only stuck on the superficial level, there's going to be no real good glue that keeps you together. So you need to find a way to, be open and welcoming to what they say. Now, they might say things that are absolutely opposed to you, but that's okay. Just hang in there and just be courteous and listen to them. And then ideally they'll recognize that, and they'll be courteous and open to you. And you can start opening a little bit more and a little bit more. And again, in today's world, we do this thing that's called oversharing or hypersharing, to where we just flood the zone with everything about ourselves. Keep stuff in reserve, a little bit more, and just slowly open up about things. And what that does, it creates that nice, that sedimentary layer of stuff. You just don't like blob like everything in one spot and let it kind of ooze out. You just give a little bit at a time and just slowly let it solidify. Slowly let it solidify. That's hard to say over and over, but just let that happen, and you end up in a situation where you start building a much firmer foundation. Another thing you do is to be genuinely interested and curious about the other person. That's one thing that I'm always trying to get my students to understand, the concept of intellectual curiosity. You should care about your subject that you're studying. Well, in this case, it's a person. So you should have this curiosity about this person. What makes them tick? Why do they believe what they believe? What's gone on in their lives? So again, as they're willing to share things, you should also be willing to want to learn those things. So it's one thing to give a space where they feel welcome to say things, but you should genuinely be curious about them. Because again, if I want to develop a friendship on the very base level, I should want to know, is this a person I could be friends with? And also I want to know more just because I'm starting to care more and more for them. So again, if I don't know them that well, I don't share too much, but the more I get to know them, the more I start to care for them, and the more I care for them, the more I want to know these deeper things so I can be attentive to them and aware of things. It's really awkward when you don't know too much and you make a joke about something and actually they've got some background history to where that joke's offensive or hurtful. And you're like, ew, if I only would have known, I wouldn't have said it or whatever. That's one of those things that is we get to know people. We get to find out more things that, like where that boundary is to where we're stepping on their toes. We don't want to do that. And likewise, they don't want to do that to us either. So we tend to be just genuinely curious about what this person is like, who they're like, things that get them motivated, things that interest them. And, eventually it gets deep enough, we start talking about their hopes and their dreams and even their fears. And, that's a place where we can really start seeing where we can, help each other out and move through life. And the next one, which is also a difficult thing, it's very difficult in today's world because we become very, insular, very much sheltered and contained by our own choosing. And that is the ability to allow other people to be different. This is really hard, especially as you get older. So when you're young, differences are exciting and fun. When you get older, and I even see this in college students, they start getting pretty well cemented on what they think and believe, and they start to become really intolerant about people who are not in that zone. Which is really funny because in college you have tons of people preaching about, being tolerant and being diverse and being equitable and being inclusive, but they end up being the most intolerant people you've ever met because if you don't fit in their exact definition and their belief system, you're ejected. You're canceled. You're out, and in some cases, you're vilified. So that's one thing that's really, really hard for us because we are in a very polarized society right now in this moment. To be able to say, you know what, you're different, and that's okay. And now, I fully understand there are some things that are deal breakers. Like if someone's a Christian and someone is a hardcore Satanist, they're going to have a hard time getting along, because they're at their core very diametrically against each other. And that's going to be obviously very, very difficult unless you're trying to win them to your convictions. But otherwise, we vary a lot on like everything. If you found someone who's identical to you, it would be an incredibly boring relationship because there'd be no growth. There'd be nothing new to talk about. You have the same feelings and beliefs and opinions on everything. So other than going, yeah, and agreeing with each other, where's there to go? So it's actually exciting and interesting to allow, that space for breathing to where people can say, I believe this. And you're like, well, I disagree. And that's okay. So then you start moving to the next level where you start actually, focusing on the curiosity I mentioned before. That's interesting that you think that. Why do you think that? And then being open to, again, allowing that space for the discussion to happen. You can see how these keep building on each other. So once you start getting in that situation where you're still building on these things, you can see where it all comes necessary. So I start having that space for openness. I start being curious about why we're different. And again, I'm prioritizing our friendship and saying our friendship's important enough that we can have these differences and still be friends. Now, some people, we've seen this, especially around election time, where people talk about like ending friendships, ending family relationships over differences in politics. Are you kidding me? I mean, but people choose to do that. That's why it's important to have prioritizing your friendship as one of the base parts, and that we're building up on. So the idea that having some differences, it's okay because guess what? They're going to ideally do the same grace to you, that you're different from them because you might have things that they disagree with. What a surprise. So we tend to think we're right. Our opinions are right. Everyone else is wrong. We have our opinions because we like them and because we're right. And then the person next to us be like, actually, you are wrong on this issue. And well, we're taken aback. But we need to be in a situation where we can actually have discussions and, I like this, you like that. And it could be small things like whether someone likes DC Comics versus Marvel Comics. That could be a small thing. Some people it's a major thing. And it could be differences of religion. Someone could be Protestant and someone could be Catholic. Someone could be whatever. So it's one of those things where you start looking at those things that come into play and what you believe. But you're willing, if you've already started working on these steps and you've already built a friendship, you're able and willing to have conversations about them. And getting to know the other person is what makes it all work. So the more I'm willing to talk and understand the differences and why they have those opinions and vice versa, our friendship only blossoms and grows. Now, it could be that we end up agreeing on more things than disagree, and that's cool, because if we disagreed on a lot of stuff, we probably wouldn't be friends, because it would be just a constant battle and it wouldn't be fun. But the thing is when we start going these steps, taking them one by one, taking our time, we end up getting the situation where we get to know people a lot better, and next thing you know, you got a new friend. Now, this is helpful when you get to a new job, a new school, you move to a new town, or, just even like you move to a new church. You just get to know, you're in a new situation, you want to know somebody. And this is a quick, easy way, easy, right? A way to get this done. So just think of these steps and just take them one at a time and see how things unfold. And there's no rule that says you have to go through all of them. You can go one step in and find out, whoa, this person's totally just diametrically opposed to what I am, and go from there. But again, step at a time and see how things go, because not every single person has to be your super duper bestest friend ever. They can just be a good acquaintance, or they could be a good friend. They could be a strong friend. So everyone has different levels. So think of those kind of things as you're trying to make your way and trying to make new friends. That's what I have for you today. Thank you very much for tuning in. As always, I appreciate you listening and giving me the like, share, and subscribe. And for those who didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thanks for tuning in this long anyway. But I'll see you next time on Communicology.